Hello, everyone. Welcome from wherever you are and whenever you are. We're all in different time zones. This is very exciting for me. Sonia, it's so great to see you here, to share the screen with you here. And before we start, just a few words. I know all of you know Professor Sonia Lubomirski teaches currently at UC Riverside. One of the greats in our field, in the field of the science of happiness. Graduated from Harvard, then went to Stanford, and you know, Sonia, as I was looking through your all your achievements, and there are many of them, I must say what jumped out at me, and this is what I want to focus on, is the Carol and Ed Diener Award for Outstanding Mid-Career Contributions in Personality Psychology. Very meaningful, of course. Professor Ed Diener passed away last week. He's considered by many, by us, to be the father of our field, you know, Dr. Happiness. And if I'm not mistaken, you were the first recipient of his prize.
No, not the first. He has there's an award in social there's an award in social psychology and in personality psychology with his name and his wife's name, Carol, too. Sort of the Ed and Carol Diener Award. And Ed, yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because he founded the science of happiness. You know, absolutely. I mean, there were, of course, other scientists who were working on, you know, who are writing about happiness or calling it different things, you know, flourishing. I mean, starting with Aristotle and Socrates talking about eudaimonia. But Ed was the first really empirical, you know, science, like really systematic empirical scientist to study happiness. And how I first got started, I'm gonna answer a question that I was hoping you were gonna ask, Tal, which is how
that I did,
which is how I got started studying happiness. It was on the very first day of grad school. I went to Stanford, and my advisor is Lee Ross, and he is one of the world's experts on conflict and negotiation. And he studied, in fact, the Israelis and Palestinians and all kinds of, you know, Northern Ireland and all kinds of conflicts around the world. And so kind of not necessarily a very happy topic always. And we met the very first day we met, and I think it was probably him. He asked, you know, what is the secret to happiness? And why are some people happier than others? And this was 1989, so more than 30 years ago. And we just sort of started chatting about it. And I looked, and so I wanted to see, like, is there any research on this? And the only person in the whole world who was doing research on happiness was Ed Diener. I think his first paper was in 74 or 76. And he didn't even call it happiness, you know, because I think he didn't think he was going to get tenure, or, you know, he was going to get promoted if he called it happiness. So he called it subjective well-being.
Subjective well-being.
Right. A term that's still stuck. And I use the term too, but I think happiness is really what we mean when we talk about happiness.
Yeah. So tell me, so over the years, I do want to hear from you about him a little bit. What paper influenced you most, or what work of his influenced you more, except for the fact that he studied happiness, and that in a sense gave us the permission to study it as a serious academic field?
Well, I think the paper that's, I guess, his blockbuster, the biggest paper, is just when he introduced, it was subjective well-being, something progress. I think it was 1984. And it was basically introducing what subjective well-being is. And you know, when people ask me what is happiness, I always use Ed Diener's definition that he introduced in, again, I believe it was 1984, which is that it has two components: being happy in your life and being happy with your life, right? With your life is life satisfaction, or about your life. Being happy in your life are the positive and negative emotions that you're experiencing on a daily basis. And so he proposed that was his idea from the 80s. And then he has this it's a psych bulletin paper, and he talks about what is correlated with happiness. You know, is age correlated with happiness? Is income? He spent a lot of time, a lot of years, a lot of papers on money and happiness. He kind of never quite solved that puzzle. I've actually been reading his son, Robert Biswas Diener, who's a really great happiness researcher himself, has been writing a few pieces about Ed, his dad, and just recently, and he has a some pieces in Positive Acorn about sort of his dad's life and kind of his major contributions. So yeah,
so I want to pick up on that. I want to pick up on money and happiness, and here is why. This is selfish, so every week, my students and I in the Happiness Studies Academy, in the certificate program, we meet. And a question that came up in one of the previous webinars was on money and happiness, because new research came out just recently, maybe questioning some of the earlier findings. So where are you on that? The relationship between money and happiness.
Such a complex question. First of all, yes, money is related to happiness. But there's so many different nuances to that question. It depends what kind of happiness you're talking about. Are you talking about life satisfaction? Are you talking about emotions, daily emotions? It turns out that life satisfaction is much more strongly related to happiness. To income, say, and wealth than our sort of daily emotions. Like even very rich people will have lots of negative emotions on a day-to-day basis because they have stress, because lots of things like that. It depends whether you're talking about individuals or countries or regions, right? So there's a bigger correlation between sort of wealth and happiness on the country level than individual level. It depends on whether you're talking about changes across time, right? So people have become much richer, for example, in the US over the last 50 years, but their happiness has stayed the same. So that's another way to look at it. I guess my bottom line, I would say, one, money really contributes to happiness if it keeps you from being poor. So on the lower levels. Two, kind of surprisingly, like even at the highest levels, there's still a correlation between money and happiness, right? So people who make $1 million are happier than those who make $500,000 a year, right? That's kind of amazing. Same thing for health, by the way. The health gradient, it's still there. Because money, of course, allows you to do a lot of things that you can do, spend your time doing things you want to spend time on. And the other bottom line is money makes you happy depending on what you do with it, how you spend it, right? And so if you spend it on social connection, right? You spend it on, people in your life, being together with people. Maybe it's dinner with friends or traveling with your family. If you spend it on personal growth, right? So learning how to cook, learning something yourself, advancing your career, or if you spend it on contributing to society, helping others, philanthropy, giving money away, those are three ways that money absolutely can make you happy. And the more you have it, the more you're able to spend it in these productive, positive ways.
Great. Now, so money does matter. What we also know, though, is that the number one predictor of happiness, and this is research that you conducted as well as others, that relationships are arguably the number one predictor of happiness, whether you look at a national level happiness, whether you look at individual level happiness. So here is the question that I want. So people talk about relationships as important. What does that actually look like? So what does a happiness-inducing relationship look like? Whether we're talking romantic partners, whether we're talking friends, colleagues, parents and children.
Right. So it's tricky to study relationships and happiness because what's most highly correlated to happiness is our feelings about relationships, right? So if we're satisfied with our marriage, right, then we're really happy. But just being married itself is related to happiness, but that correlation is not as high as you think it would be, right? So feeling like you have social support and friendship is highly related to happiness, but just number of friends is related to happiness, but the correlation is a lot lower, right? So like the objective kind of measures of relationships are not as strongly related. And of course, you can imagine why. I mean, because some of those relationships might be negative, for example, right? You could have, problems with your friends or in your relationships. So the more subjective the measure, the more strongly related it is to happiness. But I think it's more than just, it's a kind of a halo effect. I think it's more than just that if you're happy, you just think your relationships are good. It's sort of the causal direction clearly goes both ways. Actually, we should talk about the causal direction, right? So happier people, in a paper that my highest cited paper is of course with Ed Diener. And we show that not only does friendship and marriage and relationships make people happy, but also happier people are more likely to find friends, and they're more likely to obtain marriage partners, right? So happiness at time 1 predicts whether you find a marriage partner at time 2. So the causal direction really goes both ways.
Yeah, and if you can, that is also the paper that I cite the most, the 2005 paper with Diener. The causal relationship doesn't just exist in the context of relationship; it exists also in the context of success in general. Can you speak a little bit more about this paper, because I think it's such a seminal and important finding.
Yeah, I sure can, and I also should mention that sorry, I should turn my phone off. I should have mentioned, I wanted to mention actually how that paper started. I was going to a small conference, I believe in Palm Springs, where Marty Seligman, I think, was there, and Diener was there. And I was going to talk, and I had this thought of talking about the consequences of happiness, because everyone was talking about the causes of happiness. This was back in about 2000. It was in 2000, because I remember I had my oldest child was 1, and she's about to turn 22. And so I was thinking of giving a talk about the consequences of happiness, but there's like no one really talking about it. And then Ed said, we really should write a paper about this, and I thought, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. He was the one who had sort of the idea that this was worth writing about, and he was right. So basically what we did is we found every paper we could on sort of happiness and success. And by success, we mean success in relationships, success in health, and success at work, and all kinds of variables that are related to that. So for work, it could be, making money, or getting a job interview, or sort of being productive, your supervisor thinking you're productive. And so we looked at correlational evidence, sort of just kind of, people who are rated as happier, as more productive by their bosses are happier. We looked at longitudinal evidence, right? So if you're happy at time 1, your boss thinks you're more productive in 3 years. There's a study actually that shows that. And also some causal experimental evidence, where if you make people happier for a half hour, they're going to show more creativity or productivity on a task in the laboratory. And we sort of put it all together. Now we can't, it's not definitive, right? Because causality is impossible to really quote prove. But we hope we sort of triangulated on this question. Sort of, we think that success is a cause of happiness, but we also think that happiness is a cause of success. Right? So happier people are kind of luckier in the sense that they're able to obtain, they're also have stronger immune systems, and they're more likely to find friends to support them. They're more likely to sort of be productive and creative at work.
I want to fast forward now. So you wrote that in 2005. You published it in 2005. I think in 2018 or 17, you wrote another paper about happiness and work. And there again, you established a causal relationship.
Yeah, so basically we just kind of tried to extend what we did in 2005, but just in the work arena. And we found tons and tons more papers. So basically 2005, we had 225 papers at our disposal, studies at our disposal. And that's just what was available in 2005 or 2003, I think, when we were writing the paper. And then, and then 15 years later, now there's a whole lot more support in the work domain. So again, these are studies that show that that happier people who are happier or show positive emotions, they show different ways of being creative at work. They have less burnout. They're more likely to get a job interview. They're more likely to be called back for a second interview. Et cetera, et cetera. And so, and then in the other domains too, I mean, I haven't really done it myself, but actually Ed and others have followed up that paper with health in the health arena. So there are now papers that are kind of showing lots and lots more data that, health at different levels, whether it's amount of pain you experience, or your recovery from surgery, or various biomarkers, which are very indirect measures of health, are related to happiness. And then the relationships arena too. Of course, there's lots of studies kind of following up on that happier people have sort of better relationships.
So with relationships, it obviously works both ways. Happier people have better relationships. People who have better relationships are happier. So if I'm entering a relationship, well, it's a two-pronged question. If I'm entering a relationship, what do I need to keep in mind so that we can enjoy a happier relationship? And if I've been in a relationship for a long time, what can I keep in mind in order to make my relationship happier? Maybe it's the same answer, but
actually, I was going to say, I think it's the same answer, and I'm amused that I'm not I'm going to pretend to be a relationship coach. I've become really interested in, I guess I would call it connection, which is sort of how connected do you feel, with your relationship partner, with anyone. And we also should talk a little bit about what are called weak ties, which are relationships to strangers and acquaintances too, because I think those matter. Lots of research shows those matter as well. That's something we've really lost, right, during the pandemic, not having as many kind of connections with people we don't know. My favorite theory right now, it has been for a while, is a theory by Harry Rees, R-E-I-S, and he's a professor at the University of Rochester and also a dear friend of mine. And this theory states that the secret to relationships is to feel understood, to feel cared for, and to feel appreciated. To feel understood, cared for, or loved, depending on the relationship, and appreciated. So the secret is that you feel understood, cared for, and appreciated, and you let your partner also feel understood, cared for, and appreciated. Now, that's not easy necessarily. We could talk about sort of ways that you could do that. I actually think understood is really a key. I actually have talked to quite a few friends about this, and a number of them will say things like, I know my wife loves me, but I don't think she really understands me, right? So I think that's an obstacle in a lot of relationships. How do you feel understood? And how do you make the other person really feel understood and valued or appreciated?
How do you do that?
Yeah, that's kind of the next question. Well, one is by, I think self-disclosure is important. You share, right? So you share with the other person, but there's a way to share that works where it has to be reciprocal, right? Like you don't want one person to kind of share and the other person just listen. It has to be reciprocal. And to really show genuine interest in the other person. Now, you could think about this when you meet someone at a party, or you can think about it with your partner right now. Especially, in fact, those of us who've been long married, I mean, we're probably so used to our partners, maybe we forget sometimes to really truly kind of listen, right? And appreciate what they're doing and what they're thinking. But how do you show authentic interest in the other person? You can't fake it, right? You can't fake it. You can't just kind of like look like you're listening. You have to ask a lot of questions, and really specific questions that show that you're that you're listening. I mean, therapists will do this, right? A really good therapist they'll kind of ask a question that shows that they've really gotten what you're talking about. And they also extend it or expand on what you're talking about, right? Like I have my best girlfriend right now, like I'll tell her about something and she'll say, oh, well, this is what this means. And I'm like, wow, I would not have thought that. Not only does it expand my understanding, but also it means that she really got what I was saying. So I think every human being has something of interesting to offer. Even, sometimes we meet people, we think, I don't know, I'm just not interested in talking to this person. But I think with the right questions, you could get something interesting out of anyone. And certainly, hopefully, your relationship partner who you've chosen, presumably because they are interesting to you. But over time, right, maybe you lose some of that interest.
Right. So this reminds me of the work by Shelley Gable on active constructive responding. Where in her paper, she argues that a better predictor of relationship quality is not how we respond to negative self-disclosure, but rather positive self-disclosure.
Exactly. And by the way, it's not surprising to you because Shelley was a student of Harry's, and it came out of that, her work really came out of his theory, the importance of, responding. It's called partner responsiveness. Responding to your partner. And actually, I love Shelley Gable's work because I think we're all sort of surprised that like, we think that what really matters is like when something bad happens to us or to your partner, they come home with bad news and we give them emotional support. It turns out that most of us, we kind of know how to act, how to at least a little bit give emotional support, but many of us don't really know how to respond when they come home with good news and they say, hey, honey, I got a new job offer. And you know what, that could be actually kind of threatening to us because maybe it means we have to move, or maybe we might be envious because our career isn't going so well, or maybe it means they're going to spend more time at the office and not give us as much attention. So how you respond and how much excitement you show is kind of almost like a marker of how good the relationship is.
Yeah, and that has to do with the appreciation. That is one of the pillars that you spoke about. So I'm going to ask just one more question. We're going to have a discussion around one more point. But before I do, in about 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to open this up to questions. And I already see in the chat that there are many questions. You can also ask a question live by just putting your hand up. So you see the hand icon and a yellow hand will come up. You can click on that, and we'll call as many people as we have time for. So just about every week, either in the pre-recorded lectures, in the certificate in happiness studies, or in the live webinars, we talk about a paper that you authored or co-authored. And I'm sure many of my students who are attending and many others who are not my students and attending are wondering, what excites you most now? So what can we expect from the Lubomyrsky lab? We're looking for a scoop here.
Yeah. Lots of things. Well, I'm really interested in connection and how to promote connection, which is hard. I think my most interesting studies lately have been studies where we ask people to engage sort of to socially engage with others. So we have a study, for example, where we ask people to act extroverted for a week. And then the following week, we ask them to act introverted or vice versa. We didn't actually use the words extroverted and introverted because they have kind of positive and negative connotations, at least in some cultures, in Western cultures specifically. And people who were asked to act extroverted became hugely happier, right? On all the different measures that we had, like in terms of positive emotion, flow. And in the weeks where people were asked to act more introverted, which was more kind of like reflective and more quiet, they actually became less happy. So that was surprising to us because I think
so even the introverts, Sonia, even the introverts who were asked.
Yes. And now there's another study out of Melbourne that found that introverts did not benefit from, that was a between subject study. Ours was within subjects. So 1 week, everyone acted extroverted. The other week, everyone acted introverted, or vice versa. Even the introverts in our study benefited from acting more extroverted, which surprised us. Now, we think it's because when we asked them to act more extroverted, it didn't mean that like every moment of every day they had to be extroverted. They just had to choose at least a few times during the day. Like, let's say, this is before the pandemic, when you're having lunch with some colleagues, I'll say something, I'll talk a little bit more than usual, or I'll kind of speak up in class if I'm a student. But yeah, we were fascinated with that. And there really is something about sort of just connecting with others. There's a number of studies by Liz Dunn, Nick Epley, who showed that people think that they won't enjoy, say, talking to the barista or talking to a stranger on the train. But when you actually make them do that, they get happier. They report more positive moods. So we do enjoy these kinds of interactions sort of more than we think we do. We find them more rewarding. And I think that's fascinating because I think these connections, all kinds of connections matter, with the barista, with the person on the train next to us, with our husband and wife, with our teacher. They kind of make life just seem like it's a richer, interconnected, we're in kind of a rich, interconnected, interdependent world. We feel connected to another human being.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. As you're talking, I'm thinking about the work by David Myers, who connected extroversion and happiness. What you're doing here, you're establishing a causal relationship.
Exactly. And that's where we started, is that there are quite a few studies showing that extroversion is very highly correlated with positive affect. We actually have a paper that tried to disentangle what facets of extroversion, because extroversion actually has 3 facets: energy level, so extrovert people are kind of higher in energy; assertiveness, they're more assertive; and sociability, they're more sociable. We thought it was sociability. It's actually the energy level part of extroversion that was more related to positive affect, which makes sense.
Wow.
Yeah, I just think that social life, I mean, maybe I'm biased because I'm an extrovert, right? So I'm studying kind of what I do. But connecting with others is just so important to our well-being. And we may even, we even underestimate, even though we kind of all know it's important, but we kind of underestimate how important it is. Maybe the pandemic has revealed to some people, you know, how important social connection is, even more than they thought.
Yeah. So social connection obviously is important for everyone. I think the main difference, and here I'm talking as an introvert, as an extreme introvert, it's not the number of people that matters, it's the quality of the relationship that matters. And I think for an introvert, like myself, the comfort zone would very often be, you know, just being on the sideline, being quiet by myself, and getting out of the comfort zone, which is basically what you told participants to do in your study. You know, you're an introvert, get out of your comfort zone, act out of your nature, as you know, personality psychologist Brian Little talks about. Act out of your nature, and then things happen. You know, then surprises happen. Then you're actually cultivating more relationships, more connection, and that leads to more to higher levels of well-being.
Exactly, kind of an upward spiral,
Right.
Absolutely. And we have some data we're working with now where strangers were asked to talk just on Zoom. They were asked to have about a half-hour conversation with a stranger. Now imagine, what do you think, Tal? Would you enjoy, say later today, getting on Zoom with a stranger for half an hour and having a conversation with them?
Stranger?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I think many of us were like, well, I don't know. Maybe if I'm like, sometimes I'm in the mood to really be social, but do I really want to spend a half an hour of my time today talking to a stranger? And also, you know, I've never done internet dating because I've been married during all those years that it sort of was invented.
You missed the boat. Yeah.
But it sounds like that doesn't sound that fun to me. But what we found in this study is that people on a 9-point scale, we asked them sort of what their positive affect was before and after that half-hour conversation, and we found a full point increase. So from like a 6 to a 7 in positive emotion from before to after the conversation with a stranger. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, it's amazing. So before the pandemic, I would, of course, talk a lot about relationships, and I do talk about it now a lot as well, and the importance, but I made a very clear distinction between real and virtual, between real relationships and virtual relationships. And of course, you know, over the past, 14 months or so, this distinction is, pretty mute, because today most relationships, of course, except for the ones that we have at home, have become virtual relationships. So the distinction between virtual and real isn't as helpful. But what is helpful today is the distinction between deep and superficial. So, a superficial relationship would be, emojis, LOLs. But the deeper relationships would be a conversation, whether it's a half-hour conversation or an ongoing relationship with a friend. And even if we do meet online, it's still a lot better than not meeting at all.
Yeah, I agree.
So deep versus superficial, I think.
I agree, but I do want to push you a little bit on that, is that I think superficial are still important, certainly at the beginning. One of my friends said it's like the foreplay of relationships. It's kind of the hors d'oeuvre, Sometimes you need that kind of small talk. And sometimes those texts with the emojis and just a few words can be very connecting, because it could be, I was talking about the importance of feeling understood or appreciated. Just the right emoji at the right time or the right few words could make me feel really understood, right? So so that could happen too, but it's not as common than when you have like a real, especially face-to-face interaction.
Right. So so the emojis and the superficial could be sort of like the small talk, and that's how we start, and then we gain more confidence, and we push the relationship further, or rather deeper.
And how we maintain it, right? So like the friends that we haven't been able to see, we can kind of maintain it with these little moments of connection on via text or social media. By the way, another really recent interest in our lab is about technology and smartphone use and sort of social media and how that relates to well-being and whether that can harm or benefit well-being. So we're going to have, stay tuned for a couple of papers coming out on that topic. And as everything, it's nuanced, right? So it's not like your phone is bad or good for you, right? It's just like money. It depends how you use it.
Right. Yeah. The example I often use is electricity. Electricity can provide life support, or it can kill an innocent person. Depends how you use it.
Right.
Great. So Sonia, one last thing that you mentioned earlier and you touched on now, you talked about the light touch relationship that we shouldn't ignore. Can you just say a few words about that?
You mean the weak ties, the acquaintances?
The weak ties, yes.
I just think we shouldn't ignore them. Most studies do show that we're happier, more connected to our partners and our best friends and our people we know the most. But I think we just shouldn't ignore the importance of these sort of so-called weak ties in our life. And they're, again, Liz Dunn, Nick Epley, Gillian Sandstrom have done research showing the importance of these weak ties to happiness, where people, when we connect, when we just have little chats with like the grocery store clerk or a neighbor, it makes us just feel like, it makes us feel more like we belong in a community. It sort of increases that kind of sense of belongingness, the sense of social support, that there's people out there that can help us or reciprocate when we need the help. And again, we're social creatures, right? Human beings are social animals, even introverts, right? It doesn't have to, by the way, if you're an introvert, you can have one-on-one, little connections with neighbors or acquaintances, or like people at work. Again, most of us have not been to an office setting in a long time, or a factory setting or whatever. But even people you sort of pass by and you say hello to can really make a difference. I heard a talk that was really nice where it started with a woman was saying that when she was a grad student, the most important relationship in her life was with the hot dog lady. And the hot dog lady was just this lady who was near her office that she passed by every morning, and she was having a hard time, working on her research, but the hot dog lady was always like, gave her a big smile and said hi, and she said hi back. And that relationship was important to her. That made her feel happier. And so again, we shouldn't sort of neglect those kind of, what do they call this, soft touch relationships, and only focus on like the primary partners.
Yeah, and also it's related, of course, to the work by Barbara Fredrickson, Love 2.0 and positivity resonance, and the importance of just sharing, even a moment with a stranger, smiling together or at each other, and that in and of itself, releases all the chemicals associated with love.
Exactly, oxytocin and prolactin. And I love Barb's idea of these sort of micro moments of love, that love isn't just like this grand big thing that we experience once in a lifetime with one person, but it's like it's in like a moment. There's like you experience love in that moment of connection with a person. It doesn't have to be it could be anyone almost. So yeah, I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, and these are, of course, the building blocks, small building blocks, but the building blocks of a happier life. That's wonderful, Sonia. Thank you. So I have to share you now with others. I promised. We have a few hands up, which we'll get to. I see there are many questions on the chat. So let me start with one. Okay. Some people are asking, Sonia, for an update on the happiness pie. I know this is a book that so many of us, cherish and love the how of happiness. And you talked there about the happiness pie. So can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, I'm gonna put in the chat the paper. I'm just getting the link for it now. The paper that I wrote with Ken Sheldon that updates the happiness pie, because this is there it is. And so what we say in that paper is that the pie has been sort of widely misunderstood and misinterpreted. We kind of didn't mean for it to be understood the way it has been. When we proposed it like a long time ago, was it 18 years ago? We first thought of it. I think it was actually the year 2000, 21 years ago. And the idea was, when we first started thinking about like, what are the determinants of happiness? Again, this is the year 2000. There wasn't as much happiness research back then. And so we're thinking like, well, there's kind of really three determinants of happiness. It's sort of genetic influences. Some people are just sort of born happier than others. And by the way, we know that's true. We know that heritability of happiness is about 50%. It doesn't mean that we're fated to be a certain level of happiness, but there's an influence that's strong. We also know that life circumstances matter to happiness, right? Whether we're rich or poor does matter, whether we're healthy, whether we're married, et cetera. But then we also know that there's things that we actually can do in our daily lives that matter to happiness, right? Whether we feel grateful or express gratitude and we're kind to others, or we exercise or we meditate, right? There's sort of choices that we can make in our daily lives that also matter to happiness. And so the point of the pie was just to it was a thought experiment, basically. It was just to kind of put forward that there's these three categories, these sort of three buckets of kind of influences on happiness. But what we did, and I somewhat regret this, is that we looked at the literature and we wanted to kind of put a number to sort of how big are these influences. And so we looked at the literature at the time. We thought, well, it's about 50% for genetics and maybe 10, 15, 20% for life circumstances. Some of the rest is error. Those numbers have been interpreted like they're somehow set in stone. Like there's like this much of happiness is genetic and this much is circumstantial. And there's lots of caveats on the pie too. One caveat is it's about a population. It's about percent variance differences in a population. It's not about a person. So it's not like 50% of my happiness is genetically influenced. It's about a population. And the other thing is that, of course, that these factors are interdependent. They influence each other. There's error. So so it's just much more nuanced, I guess, than what we had presented. But I swear to you, everything that the update is all in that paper. It's not a very long paper, and so anyone's interested should take a look. Yeah. So I should say I still stand by that there's sort of these three categories of influences on happiness, but just don't put a very specific number on them.
And I think also, obviously, even if you are talking about 50, 40, 10, you are still talking about averages. And there is a great deal of variance.
Exactly. And we're really talking about people who are kind of like in the healthy, normal range. So of course, if you live in poverty or if you're in an abusive relationship, exactly, that life circumstance is going to have a huge influence on your happiness, more like 90%, not 10%. So we're also talking about kind of like the mid-range sort of in terms of comfort level and health.
Yes, and that goes back, of course, to what you spoke about earlier, that a person who doesn't have enough money to bring food for basic needs, of course, it's going to affect their happiness by much more than 10%. Their lack of money or presence of money. Great. So let me ask someone who has their hand up. Please be brief with your question so that we can get a few in. Michelle, can you please unmute yourself? And
hi, Tal.
Yes.
Hi, Sonia. My quick question here is, as a professional coach, I coach people, in the high tech industry, they work, and I found they are overworked, even they're working from home, and they're so stressed, very unhappy. So what are some things that can we do to help them, educate them so they can live a happier life by working from home? Because they are not really talking to people, they are just focused on work. Even in meetings, people don't turn on their video camera, they are just go straight to work and nonstop.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michelle. Good to meet you. Yeah, in fact, a lot of us are having this problem, right? That well, first of all, we don't have the separation from between work and home anymore. I was just reading today about the importance of transitions, that you need kind of like a time between transitioning out of one work mode to not just work and home, but different activities at work. Like after we have this, after you listen to a lecture, then you might want to have a little transition time. So I think one thing to remember is that we think that the more time we spend working, the more we'll accomplish, but actually there's kind of a limit. And after a certain amount of time, we actually become less and less productive, right? So I think convincing people that they can actually accomplish more by working less, which is a little counterintuitive. There's a really nice study actually in that career and happiness paper, Tal, that you had mentioned. There's a really nice study, I think from a long time ago, like the World War II era, where after a certain number of hours a week, and it might have been 50 or 60, that people just were completely like not productive. They actually were doing worse and making mistakes. And so life, I guess I'm not saying anything. I feel like I'm not saying anything that no one knows, that work-life balance is really important, but not just for happiness, but because it's actually going to make you a more productive worker, right? If you're stressed, you're just not going to think as clearly. You're going to make mistakes. If you're happier, you're going to be a better leader. You're going to be more creative, right? If you're sort of happier and less stressed. So working fewer hours is actually going to make you a better worker during those hours that you are on. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle, for that question. Thank you, Sonia, for the answer. You know what, the analogy that helps me being a type A and finding it difficult to take time off. The analogy is of a racing car. Even a race car needs a pit stop.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, a race car that doesn't take a pit stop, the tires will blow up, it will run out of fuel. So there is a lot of value, importance to not just for happiness, also for productivity, creativity, and so on. I guess when it comes to rest, God was right. We do need.
I thought you were going to say race horse, which is also a good analogy, because race horses definitely need to rest.
Also, absolutely, and athletes do, sure. Another question, Glenna, can you unmute yourself, please?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to give a hypothetical. When we speak about happiness, and I'm sorry I missed the beginning of this due to time difference. I have spoken before about procrastination. I hear Tal say that as he is naturally an introvert. However, if we have a child who is born, who is shy, who doesn't make eye contact, who doesn't engage, generally what one does is they're going to go to, a pediatrician and question what's going on for that child. So I am wondering, I suppose, firstly, in that question is, are we really automatically an introvert or an extrovert, or is it due to the environment? The other question I have is that when one is trying to move from a place of not feeling so good, maybe depressed, whereby in a group setting, in a social setting, we can be very engaging, we can be very extrovert, or at least appear so. But yet, when it comes to intimate relationships, when it comes up close and personal, then it may be harder to achieve the ability to be authentic. And I think that in the world that we live in today, first of all, often when speaking the truth, being authentic is often something that isn't always received very well. I'm in Ireland at the moment, and due to the pandemic, etc., I've noticed when people speak out about certain things that often they're the ones who are criticized, they're ostracized, and that can occur with whether it's a family, a school, an organization, an institution. So therefore, in trying to achieve that authenticity, which I think that is at the core of happiness, is a huge challenge, particularly as one may be the one in the family who opens up something that has occurred that nobody else wants to really talk about. So I'm sorry that the question is a bit long, and there are, I guess, two dimensions to it. But I guess initially, as I say, I listen to Tal. I hear, you know, somebody who speaks so eloquently, so clearly, and who expresses so much in such a wonderful way, and yet refers to themselves as introverts. And yet I wonder at the depth of that, is that a part of you, Tal, who is authentic? I believe there is a thought. My feeling is there's a deep authenticity. And
so I will let Sonia respond first,
okay.
and then
Thanks, Glenna. Yeah, lots of interesting things that you brought up. One is about introversion, extroversion. There's quite a bit of research about the genetic influences into that personality trait, and there's a pretty high genetic component. I have a child who's extremely, you know, introverted, and others are not so. So it's very, very, very genetically influenced. Authenticity, I think, is a fascinating subject. We could probably spend another 2 hours talking about. It is important to happiness. I'm not an expert on authenticity, but it is something. And actually, when we talked about the key to relationships and you know, how to make the other person feel understood, other people in your life feel understood, one way is through authenticity and through showing authentic interest in them. You know, it's very important. But those are thought. But introversion is not a bad or good thing, right? People who are introverts extroverts gain energy from social interactions. Introverts enjoy social interactions. They're not energized necessarily by large group settings, but they certainly enjoy small interactions anyway. But I think authenticity is not necessarily related to introversion. So I don't know if Tal, if you agree with that.
Yeah. So first of all, you know, I'm looking at the comments, and Michal says, as an extrovert, acting like an introvert would be painful, and you know, introvert acting like an extrovert would be painful. And I must say, I can somewhat relate to that. You know, I remember when I started teaching, it was very painful for me to stand in front of an audience and speak. And one could argue, well, you were acting out of nature. Again, going back to Brian Little's research, which I was. So does that mean I'm not authentic? In part, however, what was very meaningful for me, what was very authentic for me, was sharing what I care about so much with other people. And the way I could do that is teach. And, you know, I still get nervous at the beginning of lectures, but it is a lot easier today. So, you know, practice makes better. Thank you, Glenna.
Thank you.
So we have questions on the chat from Orly. Orly, you have 3 questions. I'm going to pick one, the first one, where you talk about Paul Dolan talks about pleasure and purpose as drivers of happiness. Any thoughts on that, Sonia?
The pleasure and purpose as drivers of happiness, sort of the two together. So, well, this is a reminder or indicator of sort of this distinction between hedonic and eudaimonic happiness. It sounds like that's what this is talking about. And actually, I was just listening to a talk about hedonic and eudaimonic happiness, and I was thinking about, like, how do I really feel about this distinction? It's real. I mean, there is a different kind of, the hedonic happiness, people describe it as, you know, when you're happy, you know, at a party or having a pleasurable meal, or, you know, looking at a beautiful sunset. So this is kind of consuming happiness, whereas eudaimonic happiness is more like you're contributing to other people's happiness. It's about leaving a legacy and doing something meaningful and being engaged. And I do think those are a very real distinction. And there's some research shows that they're associated with sort of different things. But I always like to remind people that they're very highly correlated, right? It feels good to have meaning in your life, right? It feels good when you're engaged. It feels good when you're contributing to others. They almost always go together, except sort of under extremes. I mean, you can imagine someone, I don't know, eating a lot of candy all the time that makes them happy, but then it also makes them unhappy later because they feel unhealthy. Or someone who's sort of there's the Mother Teresa example that we found out later that she was clinically depressed at some of the time. And so, you could, even though she was, doing all these good things for the world, it wasn't necessarily that she was sort of feeling good doing it, although that sounds like it was an illness. But anyway, most of the time, those pleasure and purpose, I guess, is my long answer. My short answer, go together.
Yeah. Another extreme example, as you were talking about Mother Teresa, the person who in many ways introduced the concept of meaning to the field of, at least in modern days, to the field of psychology, Viktor Frankl. He talked about experiencing a sense of meaning while at Auschwitz, but to talk about him being happy there or experiencing positive affect, it would probably be a stretch.
Of course.
Yes. So they don't always go together, but they ideally, of course, they do. Unfortunately, they often do.
Yeah.
So let's take another question. Steph Martins, can you unmute yourself, please?
Hi, Tal. It's nice to see you.
Hi.
And everyone. Hi, Sonja. Nice to meet you. Yes, so I'm always wondering about people that are more privileged than others, and it's a subject that I usually bring into some of Tal's webinars. And I was wondering, when you were talking, Sonja, about connections, if it has been studied where, for example, the happier countries, like what makes most of their happiness. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this correctly, because, and right now specifically, I'm thinking about the power of giving. And I know Elizabeth Dunn has studied how giving can make you happier than receiving. And because we're living in this time where it's so complex and so complicated, not only because of COVID, but also a lot of countries we're experiencing very like other struggles, the US, I'm from Peru, like political and social. So how much fostering these connections and how this also relates to what you were saying, purpose and meaning, and how can we help people that have more connect with this and connect with the power of giving in order not only to help the world, but to help themselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Steph. Exactly. So people have more, like people who are privileged, right, who have more to give, right? That. Yeah.
More time, more resources, more opportunities.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, first of all, there's all this research there that I would point them to research saying it actually makes you feel happier when you give your money away or you give your time away. So it's not just about, like we're contributing to other people, but also we're also benefiting ourselves. And I think that's important just to kind of highlight that. And also when a lot of times it's hard to sometimes distinguish. Our lab, my research, I try to distinguish between what we call pro-social behavior, which is when you help others, and social behavior, when you're just interacting socially with others, because they tend to go together. Pro-social, when you're helping others, you're also connecting with others. So that's another way that's another benefit that other people have, from giving away. And I mean, some of the ideas that I've seen, I mean, the giving pledge, I think, is the kind of the most extreme and best idea of this. This is Warren Buffett and Melinda and Bill Gates that have promised to give, I think, what is it, at least half of their wealth away? Is it? Oh, no, 80%.
I think 99%, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, was it? 90? Yeah, it was.
I think it's 99% of their wealth.
Wow. Yeah. So it's a very, whatever it is, it's a very high number. And so they're trying to get other people, other billionaires or other people who are very wealthy to do the same. And we have a lot of role models that people are doing this. And they're happier. I think that's, again, to me, that's the best evidence that they're happier doing this. They're happier in both the pleasure way, that it just feels good, and also in the meaning, purpose, legacy kind of way. You know, we all, I mean, really taking a big picture perspective, right? That none of us are here on this earth for that long, really, when you think about it. And, you know, what is going to be our legacy? And if you're privileged, you know, that's one of the things about privilege, is you actually can leave a very large legacy, a larger legacy than someone who's not privileged, who might leave a legacy on their friends and families, but not necessarily on an entire world, right? Or an entire neighborhood. So thank you for that.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. So we have, this is a question that I'm curious about from the chat. It's from Chris, and he asks, do introverts get happier? That is in your study, when they act as if they're extroverts. Do introverts get happier because they face discomfort and come away unharmed and successful? So is it about going out of their comfort zone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Great question. So we believe that, okay, there's other studies that show that introverts think that social interactions will not be rewarding, but when they are forced to engage in those social interactions, they find them more rewarding than they thought they were. So they kind of have they make what's called an affective forecasting error, right? They're not very good at predicting their future feelings after social interactions. So we think what happens is the introverts think, oh, I'm not going to enjoy this. I'm not going to enjoy sort of speaking up more, say in class, or, you know, whatever, engaging in more social events. But then they're forced to do this in our study, and they find it rewarding, and they're like, wow, that was rewarding. I enjoyed that. Maybe I'll do more of it. Maybe it leads to a little bit of an upward spiral. So that's my interpretation.
Great. You know, because I certainly feel, and I felt that, especially at the beginning, you know, I would walk on stage, speak to 50 people, and, you know, my mouth would go dry. I would blush. I would sweat. And at the end of it, I actually felt good about myself. I said, yeah, you know, you coped well. So it was, you know, it was, you know, a pat on the back after that experience.
And that's great. And actually, and that was kind of I think that was the example that Chris used. But that's an extreme case, right? You're actually giving a speech to 50 people. But I think in our studies, people were they were taking much smaller steps than you did, Tal, right? So they're just like, and in fact, I was extremely shy. I call myself a shy extrovert, right? And in fact, there's a typology of introversion that there's like 4 different types of introverts. And so I was a very shy introvert when I was younger. I mean, I didn't even speak to adults, you know, other than my family. But I remember when I went to college, my first year, I forced myself at every section, you know, which are like the small classes, to say at least one thing in section. I was also very intimidated by everyone. And I just forced and the first time it's really hard. The second time it's hard, you know, the 5th time it's hard. By the 10th, 20th, 30th time, you know, it's not as hard.
Yeah. And that of course goes to Wiseman's research on the as if principle, which of course it draws on William James's research from a few years prior.
As almost everything goes back to William James.
Yeah, William James, Plato, Aristotle, Lao Tzu, and Confucius. If you've got those, you've covered most of the basis. So we have a time for a couple of more questions. So let me call on Lionel. Can you unmute yourself, and if we can see your face, that would be great too.
Oh, hello, Tal. I'm calling back from Cameroon, and there's a shortage of power here. And
oh, wow.
actually,
okay.
and actually, I don't know if you can see me now.
We can.
I'm lighting up with my computer.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty nice to have you all today with Sonia and actually you, Tal. Thank you for allowing us to have the opportunity to be part of this webinar. I won't be too long. My question goes as thus. How can we bring happiness into people who don't have enough to eat? That's who focus so much on what they have to eat that they don't care about being happy or not. So, I mean, that's my question, and that's it for today. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Lionel. Thank you for joining us. God, I don't know how to answer that, because when you don't have your basic needs met, like for food and safety and shelter, it's really hard. I imagine it's almost impossible to focus on anything else. So I don't know if you can. I mean, can you be hungry? I mean, you could be hungry and you can feel connected at the same time. You could experience love and hunger at the same time. So I think with connection, I think connection would be my first, my first answer, but you still need to eat. So I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, I think the point you bring up, Lionel, is, happiness, or the sense of happiness, is not a panacea.
Yeah.
Hunger is a much bigger problem. It's a much more important question than the question of happiness. Safety, comes first, and we go back to Maslow's hierarchy, and as Sonia mentioned, safety, food, shelter. These are the fundamentals,
the basic needs.
When we
And one of the people often ask me, like, why is happiness such a big topic, and say the United States and Europe and Australia, sort of the Western world, and my answer is always that we have the luxury to think about happiness. And once most people's sort of basic needs are met, then they kind of have the luxury to be like, well, but okay, now I'm not hungry, but am I happy, right? So so I think those basic needs need to be considered first.
And with an emphasis on basic, meaning we don't need a chateau and 3 cars or even a car just to begin to think about happiness. We can begin to think about happiness a lot before it, but there is a point before it where it's very difficult to think about happiness. And you brought up probably the most common one in our world today, that and basic safety. Thank you. Jana, can you unmute yourself, please?
Hello. 2 questions, but I will be very brief, because I really want to make one. Okay, I need to choose.
Choose the best one out of the 2.
Okay, my one question is, it will be for Professor Tal and for Professor Sonia. If you could have just 1 minute to give the best knowledge that you learned during your life, that you gain. Of course, you wrote a lot and said a lot, but if you would have just 1 minute to give to next generation, to your kids, to all world, what would you say?
Okay, I can answer that in less than a minute. And it comes from my second favorite theory, which is called self-determination theory, and the 3 keys to happiness. And I already mentioned it, but I'll say it again, kind of in an overview. Connecting with others, relationships, connections, 1. 2, personal growth, focusing on growing as a person, learning. And 3, contributing to society, or to your neighborhood, or to your community, or to your family. So connections, personal growth, contribution. Tal?
Thank you. So I will second that, but since I have my minute, I will add to those. So in addition to that, the first thing for me would be learning to embrace painful emotions. So, a topic that I talk about a lot is giving ourselves the permission to be human, which essentially means that the first step to happiness is embracing unhappiness. Because when we reject painful emotions, when we think or believe that we can experience a constant high, the paradox is that these painful emotions only intensify and grow stronger. So embracing unhappiness so that we open ourselves up to happiness. Expressing gratitude, appreciation. And the last one, which is what Sonia mentioned, and which is also the topic of our conversation, connection, relationships.
Thank you very much
Jana.
for sharing your wisdom. It's very important, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's a
Thank
great
you.
cap to our conversation.
I know. So our time is up. Unfortunately, we could have gone. We have many questions and many hands are up. So I guess we'll just have to have a sequel with your permission at some point. Thank you very much for this, Sonia. You know, this conversation made me, and I'm sure many others, very happy, because what you do, and you've done it through your research throughout your career, in your in the How of Happiness, in the Myths of Happiness, in your books, you've been able to bring ideas from your lab, other people's lab, from the ivory tower, and make it accessible for all of us, whether as teachers, as coaches, as parents, and this is so valuable and so meaningful. So thank you for that, and thank you for this magical hour.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tal. I just feel so gratified when just research that usually is only kind of accessible to the lab and sort of in scholarly journals, when other people are able to use it and apply it in their lives. It's just amazing. And thank you for all the questions from you and everyone else. I've been trying to read the chat, so I've gotten a little bit out of it, even those that haven't been asked. It's connection, right? I mean, I love connecting to people through conversation and answering questions. It's really fun. It's really a highlight of today. So thank you to you too. Great. And to everyone. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and take good care of yourselves and others. Bye-bye.